What would you do if the perfect life you thought you had, the loving spouse, the happy children, the cozy home, began to crumble right before your eyes? It started for Ethan with a single text message, an innocent ping from his wife's phone that shattered the illusion of normalcy. That one message led him down a dark path of secrets, betrayals, and a truth more painful than he could have imagined. But this isn't just a story about infidelity. It's about a man standing at the edge of his world, deciding whether to fight for the life he built or walk away from the lies that threatened to consume him. It was an ordinary Friday evening. Our house was buzzing with the usual family chaos. Lila was twirling around in her ballet costume, Jake sat cross-legged in his karate gi watching an animated movie, and Mia was preparing dinner while I finished reviewing work emails at the kitchen table. Everything seemed normal, but there was an odd undercurrent of tension I couldn't ignore. Mia had been unusually quiet these past few weeks. She claimed it was work stress. Tax season always kept her busy as an accountant, but this silence felt deliberate, almost like she was holding something back. I tried to let it go until later that night when everything began to fall apart. As Mia showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wasn't looking for trouble, but the message caught my attention. It was from someone named Ben. Can't stop thinking about last night. You're amazing. My chest tightened. Who was Ben? Why was he sending messages like this to my wife? And why had Mia never mentioned him? Before I could make sense of it, the sound of the shower stopping snapped me out of my thoughts. I quickly set her phone back, pretending nothing had happened, but my mind was racing. Something was wrong, and I couldn't push it aside any longer. Just as I was trying to wrap my head around the message on Mia's phone, my work phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was my boss, Mark. Ethan, sorry to bother you this late, he said, sounding stressed. The auditors are coming first thing tomorrow, and I just realized the documents we need aren't finalized. Can you swing by the office tonight? The timing couldn't have been worse. My mind was already a whirlwind of suspicions, and now I had to focus on work. But I knew better than to refuse. Our small office didn't leave much room for errors. Sure, Mark. I'll head over now, I replied, forcing composure into my voice. Mia was brushing her wet hair in the bathroom when I knocked to let her know. She opened the door, her expression flickering between surprise and something I couldn't quite place. Relief? Maybe? That's sudden, she said neutrally. Mark needs the reports done for tomorrow's audit, I explained. It's going to be a late night. She nodded, her gaze shifting away. Okay, drive safe. As I backed out of the driveway, a strange feeling settled over me. Mia's reaction was too calm, too indifferent, almost like she was glad I'd be gone. The office was empty when I arrived, the only sound the low hum of fluorescent lights. I powered up my computer, determined to lose myself in spreadsheets and reports to escape my swirling thoughts. But no matter how hard I tried, that message from Ben kept flashing in my mind. Unable to resist any longer, I opened my personal laptop, which I'd brought along for backup. Logging into our shared family phone account wasn't something I'd done before, but I knew it would show me call and text records for all our lines. I hesitated briefly, but curiosity and doubt overpowered my guilt. I typed Ben into the search bar. The results appeared immediately, dozens of texts exchanged over the past few weeks. Some were sent late at night, others during lunch breaks, and even while we were sitting together watching TV. A few coincided with times Mia had said she was working late or running errands. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the timestamps, each one confirming what I feared. It wasn't just the quantity of messages, it was the pattern. Secretive, consistent, intimate. This wasn't about work. A noise from the hallway startled me, and I slammed the laptop shut. It was just the janitor making his rounds, but it jarred me all the same. I had enough to know something was seriously wrong, but I still didn't have the full picture. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I'd find out everything. By the time the sun came up, I was running on fumes. I had spent the entire night at the office, finishing the reports while my mind spun with unanswered questions about Mia and Ben. When Mark gave me an approving pat on the back and told me to go home and rest, I forced a smile, though rest was the last thing on my mind. I needed answers now. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was unusually still. Mia had already taken Lila and Jake to their morning activities, leaving me with a rare moment of solitude. It was the perfect chance to investigate further. Her phone was my first stop. Mia always left it charging in the kitchen when she wasn't home, and sure enough, it was there. My hands shook slightly as I picked it up, but when I opened her messages, the thread with Ben was gone. She deleted it. A wave of cold dread settled over me. Mia never deleted texts, not unless she was hiding something. This was confirmation that whatever was going on, she didn't want me to find out. Next, I turned to her laptop. Mia rarely used it at home since most of her accounting work was done at the office, but I knew the password. It had been the same for years. I opened it and started searching. At first, everything seemed normal. Spreadsheets, family photos, and email shortcuts. But then I noticed a second email account bookmarked on her browser. My stomach churned as I clicked it, and the inbox opened without needing a password. There it was. Dozens of emails from Ben. Some were casual, others flirtatious, but the most recent ones hit me like a freight train. Can't wait to see you again tonight. I'll bring the wine this time. Tonight, while I was supposed to be home recovering from my all-nighter, my hands clenched into fists. I kept scrolling and found her calendar. The entry for tonight was marked Yoga Night, an excuse she often used for some time to herself. But this time, there was a note attached. Dinner with Ben, 6 p.m., Old Birch Inn. The Old Birch Inn wasn't a yoga studio. It was a quiet, upscale restaurant known for its romantic atmosphere. My chest tightened as the realization hit me. This wasn't just flirting or texting. She was planning to see him. I closed the laptop with a snap, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was undeniable. Mia was lying to me, and I was done playing detective. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to act normal as Lila and Jake came home from their activities, laughing and showing me their crafts and medals. Mia came back shortly after, her smile warm and casual. It was a smile I had fallen in love with, but now it felt hollow. How could she lie to me so effortlessly? I watched her closely at dinner. She barely touched her food, kept avoiding my eyes, and glanced at the clock more often than usual. It was clear she was anxious to leave. At 5:30, she excused herself, saying she needed to get ready for yoga. She kissed my cheek lightly, saying, "I won't be too late." I forced a smile. "Take your time. You deserve it." As she went upstairs, I tidied the kitchen, my hands moving automatically while my mind burned with anger and hurt. When she left, I gave her a 10-minute head start before grabbing my keys and heading out. The drive to the Old Birch Inn felt like an eternity. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and my mind raced with questions. What was Mia doing? How long had this been going on? Was I too late to fix it? Or had she already made up her mind to leave me behind? When I arrived, I parked across the street, far enough to stay unnoticed. Sure enough, Mia's car was already there, parked neatly near the restaurant entrance. My stomach churned as I scanned the windows. Inside, couples sat at cozy tables, chatting and laughing, while candlelight flickered softly. And then I saw her. Mia was sitting at a table tucked in the corner, her head tilted toward a man I immediately recognized. It was Ben, the same Ben I had seen earlier that morning, the auditor from work. He had shaken my hand and smiled as though he were just another professional doing his job. Now, he was leaning across the table toward my wife, laughing at something she said. My chest tightened as I watched them. Mia's expression was unguarded, her laugh light and carefree in a way I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just their conversation or their closeness that stung. It was the way her hand lingered on his, the intimacy that should have been reserved for me. I sat frozen in my car, unable to look away. My mind screamed at me to march into the restaurant, to demand an explanation, to stop this right here and now. But I knew that wasn't the way. If I barged in without proof, she could twist the story, make excuses, and gaslight me into doubting what I'd seen. No, I needed more than just a confrontation. I needed the truth, the whole truth. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I opened the camera. Through the restaurant window, I snapped several photos of them together. Mia smiling, Ben leaning in, their hands brushing across the table. Each shot felt like a dagger to my chest, but I forced myself to capture every damning detail. They stayed for a while, enjoying their meal as though they had all the time in the world. When they finally got up to leave, I watched as they walked out arm in arm, laughing like a couple without a care. My stomach churned as they headed toward Ben's car, his hand resting on the small of her back. I followed them at a safe distance, my heart pounding as I tried to keep my emotions in check. They didn't drive far, just across town to the Grand Maple Lodge. It was the city's most expensive hotel, a place I'd once suggested for our anniversary, though we never went. Now here they were, checking in together as though they belonged. I stayed in the shadows, watching as they handed their bags, a small overnight bag I recognized as Mia's, to the bellhop. The sight of her bag, packed in our home, felt like the final nail in the coffin. This wasn't just a casual fling. This was deliberate, planned. They disappeared into the hotel, leaving me standing outside in the cold. My hands clenched into fists as I fought the urge to storm in and confront them. But I knew better. I needed to be smart about this. Charging in blind would only give Mia an opportunity to deny everything. I circled the hotel, looking for their room. On the ground floor, I spotted a window with a faint glow spilling out. The curtains were drawn, but I could see shadows moving inside, two figures close together. My breath hitched as I stood there, frozen by the weight of the betrayal. This was it. Proof. I had what I needed. But as I stood there, staring at the light through the curtains, one question burned in my mind. What was I going to do next? I couldn't leave without knowing for sure. My gut churned as I walked back to the hotel's entrance, the warm lights and polished marble of the lobby contrasting starkly with the cold knot in my stomach. The manager stood behind the front desk, a man in his 50s with a neatly pressed suit and a welcoming smile that faltered as he noticed my tense expression. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked politely. I hesitated for a moment, unsure how much I should say. Finally, I forced myself to speak, keeping my tone calm but firm. "I believe my wife just checked in with another man," I said, meeting his gaze. "I need to know what room they're in." The manager's brow furrowed, and he glanced down at the desk before shaking his head. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't disclose information about our guests." I expected this answer, but it still made my chest tighten. I nodded, trying to appear composed. "I understand. Look, this is my wife we're talking about. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need the truth." He looked at me for a long moment, his expression softening. Finally, he sighed. "I can't tell you their room number, but I can walk you to the hallway where they were last seen." That's the best I can do. Relief and dread washed over me simultaneously. "Thank you," I said quietly. The manager led me down the main hallway, stopping near a corner where a few ground floor rooms were located. "It was one of these," he said, gesturing vaguely. "But please, sir, don't cause a disturbance. If you need to confront someone, I recommend doing so outside the hotel." I nodded again, my throat tight. "I appreciate your help." As he walked away, I stood in the dimly lit corridor, staring at the row of doors. My pulse thundered in my ears as I counted the steps they'd taken earlier in the evening. Room 104. That had to be it. For a moment, I debated my next move. Should I knock? Wait outside? Walk away entirely? Every instinct screamed at me to do something, to take action, to stop this nightmare from spiraling any further. But deep down, I knew I needed to stay calm and collected. This wasn't just about me. It was about finding the undeniable truth. I stood outside the door for what felt like an eternity, my breathing shallow and my fists clenched at my sides. The muffled sound of laughter floated through the thick wood, twisting the knife in my chest even further. I wanted to kick the door down, to demand answers, but I forced myself to step away. Instead, I left the hotel quietly, retreating to my car parked across the street. I sat there for a long time, staring at the glowing window of their room. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, pulling me out of my daze. It was a text from Mia. "Won't be too late. Love you." The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. She was inside that room with another man, lying to my face in real time, pretending that everything was fine. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I tried to keep myself from spiraling. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a complete rejection of the life we'd built together. And in that moment, as I stared at the glowing window, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The drive home felt surreal, as though I were floating through a fog. The world outside my car seemed muted, distant, as if it didn't matter anymore. My mind was racing, replaying every detail of what I had just seen. The images of Mia and Ben laughing together, holding hands, disappearing into that hotel room. They wouldn't stop flashing in my head. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark and quiet. Lila and Jake were already asleep, and for that, I was grateful. I needed time to think, time to process what I just uncovered. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the faint glow of the porch light, before finally stepping out. Inside, I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water. The silence in the house felt suffocating, and I realized that for the first time in years, I didn't know what my next move should be. My entire world had been flipped upside down, and I was standing in the wreckage, unsure how to proceed. I thought about confronting Mia the moment she came home. But then what? She'd deny it, make excuses, maybe even turn it around on me. No, I couldn't rush into this. I needed a plan, something that would force her to tell the truth without giving her any room to manipulate the situation. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my glass of water, when my phone buzzed again. Another text from Mia. Heading home soon. How are the kids tonight? The casualness of her message made my blood boil. She had just been with Ben, sharing dinner, sharing a hotel room, and now she was pretending as though she were at yoga, acting like the loving wife and mother. I clenched my jaw, refusing to respond. Instead, I decided to document everything. I pulled out my phone and saved the photos I had taken earlier, making sure to back them up to my email. Then, I started a folder on my laptop labeled Simply Proof. Every text, every photo, every detail of tonight went into that folder. If Mia wanted to lie, she wouldn't be able to do it for long. By the time Mia came home, it was past midnight. I heard her car in the driveway and the soft click of the front door opening. My heart pounded as her footsteps echoed down the hallway, and I quickly grabbed my glass of water, trying to appear casual. "Hey," she said softly as she stepped into the kitchen. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her cheeks flushed. "You're still up?" "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Just couldn't sleep." She set her yoga bag on the counter, her smile warm but strained. "How were the kids tonight?" "They were fine," I said, my eyes fixed on her. "How was yoga?" "Oh, it was great," she said, her voice light. "Really relaxing." I nodded slowly, studying her face. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, but I could see the faintest flicker of something in her expression, guilt, perhaps, or fear. It was enough to make my stomach churn. "Glad to hear it," I said, forcing a smile. She kissed me on the cheek and headed upstairs, saying she was exhausted. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to her footsteps fade, my heart heavy with the weight of what I had to do. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the images came back. Mia at the restaurant, her hand on Ben's, her overnight bag disappearing into the hotel. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in my mind. By morning, my exhaustion was buried under a simmering determination. I needed to uncover the full truth, no matter how painful it might be. Mia acted normal the next day, bustling around the house as though nothing had happened. She made breakfast for the kids, chatted with me about weekend plans, and even laughed at something Jake said. But now, every word, every gesture felt like a performance. It was almost impressive how easily she wore the mask of a devoted wife and mother. I decided to stay quiet for the moment. Confronting her now, with only the photos and messages I'd found, would give her room to wriggle out of it. No, I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. While Mia took Lila to her dance class, I went to the garage. Her yoga bag was sitting in the trunk of her car, right where she'd left it last night. My hands shook slightly as I opened the bag. Inside, I found a water bottle, a towel, and an extra pair of leggings. Nothing unusual. But then I spotted something tucked into the side pocket. It was a receipt. I unfolded it carefully, my heart racing as I read the details. It was from the old Birch Inn, time-stamped from the night before. 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, and dessert. There was no mention of yoga, No hint of the alibi she had so confidently given me. I slipped the receipt into my pocket, my resolve hardening. With this, I had something tangible. She couldn't brush it off or claim it didn't happen. Still, I needed more. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I kept my distance from Mia, answering her questions with vague responses and avoiding eye contact. She didn't seem to notice, too busy with the kids and her usual routines. I couldn't tell if she was oblivious or just overconfident in her ability to hide the truth. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I made my next move. While Mia showered, I accessed her laptop again. This time, I wasn't just looking for emails or messages. I wanted to find out where she was planning to meet Ben next. I opened her calendar and scrolled through the upcoming week. There it was, another yoga night, marked for Wednesday evening. No notes this time, but I didn't need them. If she thought she could keep doing this under my nose, she was sorely mistaken. I sat back, staring at the screen, my mind buzzing with plans. If Wednesday was her next rendezvous, I would be ready. I'd follow her again, catch her in the act, and leave no room for excuses. The truth was going to come out, one way or another. Mia came downstairs shortly after, her hair damp and her smile warm. "You're quiet tonight," she said, sitting beside me on the couch. "Just tired," I replied, forcing a small smile. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and for a moment, I felt the familiar weight of her presence. But it wasn't the same. It felt hollow now, like a shadow of what we once had. I stayed still, letting her rest against me, all the while knowing that the clock was ticking down to the moment when everything would change. The days leading up to Wednesday were excruciating. I acted normal, keeping up the facade for the kids' sake. But inside, I was boiling with anger and dread. Mia seemed completely at ease, going about her routines as though nothing had changed. The more I watched her, the more I saw the cracks. Quick glances at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, hurried excuses for stepping out of the room. Every little detail added fuel to the fire. When Wednesday finally came, I was ready. I had everything I needed. The photos from the restaurant, the receipt from the old Birch Inn, and a plan to follow her once she left the house. If she thought she could get away with it again, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. Mia left around 6 p.m., dressed in her usual yoga attire with her bag slung over her shoulder. "I'll be back in a couple of hours," she said casually, leaning in for a quick kiss on my cheek. I barely managed to keep my composure as I nodded and told her to have a good class. As soon as she drove off, I grabbed my keys and followed. Keeping a safe distance, I trailed her car through town. She didn't head toward the community center where her yoga classes were held. Instead, she drove across town to a small, upscale bistro I recognized immediately. It was where we used to go on special occasions. My chest tightened as I watched her park and walk inside. She wasn't meeting a friend or a group. This wasn't a last-minute errand. This was something planned, something intentional. I stayed in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I waited. A few minutes later, another car pulled into the lot. I recognized it immediately, Ben's. He stepped out, dressed sharply, and headed straight into the restaurant without hesitation. I didn't need any more confirmation. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a coincidence. They were meeting again, just like they had on Friday. I debated what to do next. Part of me wanted to storm in, to confront them both in the middle of their romantic dinner. But I knew better. I needed to keep a clear head, to gather everything I could before confronting Mia. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about making sure there was no way for her to manipulate the situation. I grabbed my phone and took more photos, documenting every step. Mia and Ben sitting at the table, laughing, their heads leaning close together. Their body language spoke volumes, and the pain of seeing it with my own eyes was almost unbearable. But I forced myself to stay, to keep watching, to make sure I had all the proof I needed. After what felt like hours, they finally left the restaurant. I followed them again, just as I had before, my heart pounding with every turn. This time, they went straight to the Grand Maple Lodge. My stomach churned as I watched them hand their bags to the valet and disappear inside. I didn't need to see any more. I already knew what was happening, and every second of it tore at me. As I sat in my car, staring at the hotel entrance, I realized that this wasn't just about catching Mia. It was about deciding what to do next. Was there a way back from this? Or was this the beginning of the end? I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity, staring at the glowing entrance of the Grand Maple Lodge. My mind raced with questions, but one thought stood out above the rest. What was I supposed to do now? The proof was undeniable. Mia wasn't just lying. She was living a double life. But how could I even begin to confront her without shattering everything we'd built together? And the kids, what would this do to them? After what felt like hours, I finally started the car and drove home. I couldn't bring myself to stay outside that hotel any longer, imagining what was happening inside. Every moment I lingered, the pain in my chest deepened, and I knew I needed to be strong for what lay ahead. Back at the house, the silence was overwhelming. Lila and Jake were sound asleep, their peaceful faces oblivious to the storm brewing in their parents' lives. I stood in their doorways for a long time, watching them, my heart breaking at the thought of how this would affect them. They didn't deserve this. None of us did. I spent the rest of the night pacing the living room, replaying every detail of the past few weeks in my mind. I thought about Mia's excuses, her smiles, the way she brushed off my questions. It all felt like a cruel joke now, a game where I had been the only one who didn't know the rules. The anger swirled inside me, but so did the hurt. How could she do this to me? To us? When Mia finally came home, it was nearly 1 a.m. I heard her car in the driveway, followed by the quiet click of the front door. She walked into the house, her yoga bag slung over her shoulder, and froze when she saw me sitting on the couch. For a brief moment, her face registered surprise, maybe even guilt, but she quickly covered it with a casual smile. "Still up?" she asked, setting her bag down on the counter. "I couldn't sleep," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "How was yoga?" "Relaxing," she replied, heading to the fridge for a bottle of water. "We worked on some new poses tonight. Really helped with my back pain." I stared at her, struggling to keep my emotions in check. She didn't even flinch, didn't hesitate as she lied to my face. "Glad to hear it," I said, my voice tight. She walked over to me, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "You should try to get some rest," she said softly. "You've been looking tired lately." I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, maybe I will." She headed upstairs, leaving me alone in the dimly lit living room. I listened to her footsteps fade, followed by the sound of the shower running. My fists clenched at my sides, and I felt like I might explode from the weight of it all. The proof I'd gathered, the photos, the receipts, the messages, flashed through my mind. It was all there, undeniable and damning. But I still wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed time to figure out my next move, to decide how to handle this in a way that protected Lila and Jake from the fallout. As the water shut off upstairs, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't let Mia keep lying to me. She could hide behind her excuses for now, but the truth was coming, and when it did, she wouldn't be able to escape it. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of clarity. I didn't know exactly how things would unfold, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her betrayal break me. The next morning, I woke with a clear purpose. I couldn't live like this anymore, walking on eggshells, pretending I didn't know the truth. It was time to confront Mia and face whatever came next, no matter how painful. My only priority now was protecting Lila and Jake, ensuring they had as much stability as possible. I waited until after breakfast, once the kids had gone outside to play. Mia stood at the sink, rinsing plates, humming softly to herself. I took a deep breath and stepped into the kitchen. "Mia," I said, my voice steady but firm, "we need to talk." She glanced over her shoulder, her expression curious but unconcerned. "What's on your mind?" I pulled out my phone, opened the photos I had taken at the old Birch Inn and the hotel, and set it on the counter in front of her. Her humming stopped, and her body stiffened as she stared at the screen. The color drained from her face. "I know," I said simply. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and panicked. "Ethan, it's not." "Don't," I interrupted sharply. "Don't lie to me anymore. I know about Ben. I know about the dinners, the hotel. I know everything." She took a step back, gripping the edge of the counter like it might keep her steady. I can explain, she stammered. Then explain, I said, crossing my arms. Tell me why you've been sneaking around behind my back. Tell me how long this has been going on. Tell me why you thought it was okay to tear our family apart. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't mean for it to go so far. But it did, I said, my voice rising. You made choices, Mia. You lied to me, to the kids, to yourself. And for what? For him? She wiped at her tears, her voice trembling. Ethan, I felt so lonely. You've been so busy with work, and I needed someone to notice me, to make me feel like I mattered. I laughed bitterly. And you didn't think to talk to me about that? To tell me how you felt instead of running off with someone else? I didn't know how, she cried, her voice cracking. I was scared you'd push me away, and then Ben was there, and it just happened. I shook my head, the weight of her words sinking in. It didn't just happen, Mia. You made it happen. Over and over again. She looked down at the counter, her tears falling freely now. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Her apology felt hollow, too little too late. I leaned against the counter, my anger giving way to exhaustion. I need time to think, I said quietly. This is bigger than just us. I need to figure out what's best for Lila and Jake. What are you saying? She asked, her voice barely audible. I'm saying I don't know if this can be fixed, I replied, meeting her tearful gaze. But I do know one thing. We owe it to the kids to handle this with dignity. They don't deserve to suffer because of your choices. She nodded slowly, her expression filled with regret. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. The damage was done, and the trust between us was shattered. Still, I knew this wasn't a decision I could rush. For now, I would focus on the kids, on giving them as much normalcy as possible while I figured out the next steps. As Mia walked away, her shoulders slumped with guilt. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The truth was out, but it didn't bring closure, just a new set of questions about what the future would look like. One thing was certain, though. I would come out of this stronger. I had to, for my kids, for myself, for the life I still wanted to build. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it. No more lies. No more pretending. Just the truth, no matter how messy it was.